You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
I'm an Army veteran, a combat veteran, retired after 20 years of active service. So I retired in 2018 and I started Adebayo, Adeleke LLC, which is a supply chain consulting company. Africa has its own uniqueness. I think Africa needs to play its own role by using its uniqueness at its own advantage. Some people might not like that. They might actually think it's a bribe. They say all these nuances, oftentimes some of them has been kind of exaggerated over the point of time. There's something that always draws you back. And for me, there's always that clearing call to do the best I can to advance Africa in my own little way.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the second episode of the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find great people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. This episode, we have a very special guest. We have supply chain management expert Adebayo Adeleke, who is a US Army veteran and president and CEO of Adebayo Adeleke Limited. Welcome to the podcast, Adebayo. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting. I'm privileged and it was a great honor to be on your podcast today. I was looking forward to it since we both talk about it. So, this is going to be awesome, Tessa. It's going to be awesome. So thank you so much.
I'm extremely excited as well. I don't think my intro has actually done you much justice. So please feel free to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Adebayo?
Yeah, thank you, Tess. Adebayo Adeleke is my name, and I'm a man that wears many hats. But for the purpose of this podcast, I'm going to limit it to what is quite centric and to what we're talking about. So I started this journey of supply chain management over 20 years ago when I enlisted in the United States Army. I'm an Army veteran, a combat veteran, retired after 20 years of active service. So I retired in 2018 and I started Adebayo Adeleke LLC, which is a supply chain consulting company, putting my skills that I've earned, garnered when I was in the military, and also my experience into play, using military knowledge transfer and solutions transfer to help our civilian counterparts. So that is what I'm doing right now. As you rightfully said, I'm also adjunct professor at Eastern State University, where I talked about leadership, management, and also operations management as well, which is very centric to supply chain management. So that's who I am in a short. I'm also, as you guys can't see me, I'm also wearing Rising Leadership Foundation t-shirt, which is a nonprofit that I founded to bridge leadership and governance gap in inner cities of Texas, state of Texas here in the U.S., and also in African diaspora community and also in the continent of Africa. It's very near and dear to my heart. I was born and raised in Nigeria. So regardless of wherever I go, north, south, east, west, or so like that, home is always going to be that anchoring. So for us, my ancestral home is Nigeria. So I kind of hold it to help in one way or the other.
Yeah, fantastic for that introduction. So you've told us a bit about your experience in the United States, and you're currently based in the United States. As this is the Unlocking Africa podcast, I'm going to jump right into it. Mm-hmm. You have a lot of work or interest in Africa. Mm-hmm. Why Africa? What is it about Africa that drew you back in as you are currently based in the United States?
Absolutely. So there's been a lot of migration over the course of time. I think over 200 and something million people migrate on a yearly basis. Most people don't even know that for certain reason known to them. I migrated about 25 or so years ago, and it's been very interesting experience. And people was like, wow, most people after a while don't even know that I came from Nigeria. So in that conversation, people were like, wow, we need to see more of what's going on the continent. I'm like, yeah, there's a lot that came from where I came from. The media doesn't portray Africa in its best. In some cases they do, in some they don't. In most instances they don't. So I think I hold it to help to kind of advance Africa from where it is to where it needs to become. People that have come out of it, either you still don't call the place home, but for one way or the other, we still hold our kind of origin from there. I am American now. I served the country of United States for 20 years, laid down my life for it. So America is my home, but there's something that always draws you back. And for me, there's always that clearing call to do the best I can to be able to advance Africa in my own little way. When my time is up in this world, I want to say, you know what, I've done a little to advance to make the world a better place than I left it.
Yes, I agree. I think it's always important to make an impact with whatever it is that you decide to do.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned in terms of your Nigerian heritage. So do you think that understanding the cultural side of Africa was an advantage when you decided to do business or when doing business in Africa, and why?
Absolutely. It does to a large extent. It does. I mean, I'm not currently living on the continent, so I can't say I'm an expert on culture because the African culture, multiple cultures, evolve on a day-to-day basis.
Yes.
What I knew when I live on the continent is obsolete by now. So, but I think the people, the understanding the people is most important thing. Actually, it's centric to everything that we do, either business, either creating processes, but understanding the people and the culture makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of those has been neglected over time. Understanding people and the culture. I think Africa, which you and I have discussed on several occasions, yes, a lot of people have dumped so much processes, so much thing that they think we should be doing. I think that in itself is a neocolonization precept. I can prefix that with colonization, and also I think it's a form of it's a lot of form of all kinds of things. I think Africa, for it's a free continent. I think they should allow Africa to kind of use own indigenous ways to kind of develop itself. But over the course of time, a lot of people have a lot of people believe what is necessary for Africa. Not that Africa, we believe this is good for you, this is good for you. But Africa has its own uniqueness. I think Africa needs to play its own role by using its uniqueness at its own advantage. But we don't allow Africa to actually do that, which is very saddening. So everywhere you go is always some form, because I believe Africa in itself has its own form of development, but we believe that if we don't copy the West or the East, that we have not developed. So it's a very jacked up way of thinking. And I'm really, and if we don't correct it in any way, shape or form, I think we're going to set the whole continent back for a long time, because we're always going to try to catch up. And it's never going to happen until we admit what our own developmental phase is, until we admit that this is developing in ourselves. And I think you and I have discussed it, but we might not have the Amazon trucks in Africa like you guys have it in the UK and in the US, but if riding a motorcycle is our last mile delivery, so this is our way, or this is our last mile, and we love it, we embrace it, and this is it. This is how we define our last mile. And I think because people are, those things are not, they're not okay. You shouldn't have so many bikes on the road. That might be from your point of view. That might be from you looking at it from Western optics to be able to judge African supply chain. And I've always have, I've always have some kind of I kind of push back when people talks about the African supply chain is not up to par. What is supply chain in the whole essence? Is that, getting from goods and services from point A to point A to B, and whatever, as long as you get it done. Because it doesn't fit some kind of narrative, that doesn't mean that it's not happening. We might not lack, we actually lack infrastructure, logistical infrastructure to make this thing happen. But as long as it's happening, I don't think what's going on in the continent is completely different from what is going on. Actually, it is not completely different from what's going on in the US or in China or in Europe as well. I just think it's a different flavor. Is it that you like it or not? Or is it that you understand it or not? The different set of people, culture, interwoven, ways of life interwoven. African supply chain is actually quite unique and interesting to me, because there's so many nuances to it. Some of the time funny, some of them frustrating, but so is everything anywhere you go in the world. If you're dealing with a Chinese supplier, you understand exactly what I'm talking about, because oftentimes they don't even conform to your own ways of life. All is, hey, you want this, I get it to you. How you get it is not even a problem. So, and I think until we are feeling comfortable about our ways of life, nobody else is going to actually take us serious. And those are the things we are trying to do and redress in one way or another.
Yeah.
I hope I'm not too long-winded.
No, totally. You've answered the question and much more. So I think you've touched upon the nuances of African supply chain, which sometimes people will perceive as a challenge. So Supply chain does come with its challenges, which develops new ways of working. When you first started to explore the African supply chain management concept or ways of working, what were some of the initial challenges that you encountered, and what solutions did you find to work around them or overcome them?
I think, like I said, it boils down to understanding people and culture. My end state is to get this thing from point A to point B. There's a lot in between. There's government. There's people that they call themselves government, but they're not. They're all kind of actors along the way. And understanding the people and understanding them, and everybody wants a stake in it. Just like when I was working in Jordan, trying to move point A to point B, you go to better ones in the desert. Though they might not be of anything to you, but they can actually make your movement across the desert. They can make it very, very interesting and frustrating as well. So understanding that these people might not have a stake in it, but they can actually do affect the movement of service. So ability to do that, and people not mind, will kick against this. We've been known that Africa has a lot of corrupt practices, at least from the West point of view. But let's say, for example, I'm moving the bag of cocoa from one place to the other.
Yeah.
And somebody came to visit you or to able to negotiate, and you give them transport money or give them some of that money to kind of, it's not too far-fetched in African culture. When you greet somebody, they give you transport money. It's just a way of life. But to others, when you give something like that, just can you use this to buy water or Coke? Some people might not like that. They might actually think it's a bribe. And then they say all these nuances. Oftentimes, some of them has been kind of exaggerated over the point of time, And we have to recognize certain things about that. There's some practices that to the West, actually, to everyone is corrupt. Why should I have to pay you to do this and do that? I get it. I mean, I kick against such a practice because I live most of my adult life in the West. But at the same time, I also recognize that if I don't pay some of these things, or if I don't grease the palms, I'm not going to achieve what I wanted to achieve. There are certain people that can make your movement of goods and services extremely difficult. And first of all, I have manufacturing, I have a MRP kind of system that I have to meet. I have to get this thing on the boat. There's a production plan waiting for me. If I don't get it on, there's going to be backward. I mean, so you have to look at it. Which one is a greater loss? And you trying to evangelize or pontificate this idea of corruption and conduct of Africa. Trust me, people of your greater influence have done it and they failed. So you have to look at, okay, what am I willing to do? What is my moral compass telling me to do and what is not? There are certain things that are flat out corruption. And for me, to be honest with you, I think corruption is in every economy. I think it's the engine of the economy. Regardless of how you like it or not, there's some they put on paper, there's some that is not put on paper. I think in most countries, it's put on paper, but it's still corrupt. Whenever you do something that is that other people you wouldn't be proud of. I mean, most governments, to be honest with you, there are a lot of corrupt practices there. That's not the scope of these podcasts, but I believe that some of these cultural nuances that might not be morally right or ethically right, will build it into the system and kind of fine-tune it or refine it in such a way that everybody has a stake in it, everybody has a piece of it. I think movement of goods and services from point A to point B in Africa will be seamless in a way. I'm not encouraging any shape or form, encouraging the adoption of outrageous corruptible practices. I'm just saying there are some of our cultural practices that increase greasing of hands, that increase. It's all about people. And people in Africa, if you don't, understanding your elders, understanding the local communities, you don't do for it, nothing is going to happen. It's just the way of the world. I mean, I grew up in those environments. You grew up in the same environment. Yes. If you don't respect your elders, they're not even going to give you a light of a day. If you don't help, and respecting elders, doing certain things, giving money and everything, it's part of the old deal. So understanding those cultural nuances and able to thrive and, kind of maneuver, dodge the landmines as necessary is very unique to me. And I love it. Understanding what the Western culture is and the Eastern culture is, and understanding what the African culture is, and how to navigate through it, knowing what you're willing to, bite on and knowing what not, So it's a very interesting thing for me. It's like feeling the pulse of an operation. It's very, very interesting. People are like, why do you like that? It's too much trouble. It's like, it is what it is. I love it because you can able to navigate and help with, and it actually allows you to see people at their best. You can actually tell people, you can actually convince them like what they're doing is wrong. If you can do it in a better way and everybody's win-win. And you can do it in such a way and in such a manner that you make them feel great about themselves. It's not making them feel like they're corrupt in a way. So I love those kind of things. That's what actually draws me back to the continent. So I think a lot can be done in the way we move goods and services across the continent. I think a lot more, but we have to do it in a very systematic way because the system, as we know it, what we've created over the course of time has really ridiculed a lot of people's emotions. People are hungry, people are in poverty. Yeah. And when you try to move goods and services in a poverty abjected environment, you have to understand that there will be a lot of corruption going on. You have to admit it. You can't have it. You cannot move squeezy clean in a very abjected poverty environment and you think that they'll be right. Is it that you get bad quality of product or you're not getting any product at all, period. So you have to understand, you have to make people feel good because like a friend of mine always say that only a person who is well is one that's going to give blood. It's a fact. Only a person who is well is going to give blood. So you can't tell me that you are moving a particular commodity that is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in front of me and I have authority over it. I'm putting it on my truck and I'm moving it and you're not going to give me anything other than this. So I am making $5,000 a year and I am moving something that can, if I sell it, I can make like God knows 20 or 50 years of my earnings.
Yes.
So why should I even deliver this goods to you, to your point B? Why? Yeah. So those are the things you have to put in context when you're moving goods and services across Africa. I mean, some people will do it well, but large amount of people, you'll not even get your truck will be parked in the middle of nowhere and people will just be south. I mean, I've seen it done, not only in Nigeria, but other parts of the world. Yeah. Not only in Nigeria, the other part of Africa, and other parts of the world. So what I'm saying is, it's quite interesting. For me, what really interests me is about understanding the dynamics and able to move goods and services. There are certain things that you can avoid, you can avert, but making people along the chain, that everybody that lines up your supply chain in Africa, understand what you're trying to do and letting them help you to achieve your goal without demeaning them and also without encouraging corruptible practices. It's possible and it's doable.
Yeah. I think with what you've mentioned, it's not always just unique to Africa in terms of some of the bottlenecks, the challenges or friction points. Because what you've seen as well recently is more of an adoption of data-driven platforms to manage supply chains globally and within Africa. But from my experience, sometimes you find that finding reliable or accurate or fair and timely data is sometimes a challenge within the African market. What has been your experience in terms of acquiring reliable data to try and navigate or try and get around some of these bottlenecks, some of these friction points within African supply chain?
Yeah, getting data in Africa is a challenge because we don't kind of operate like that. And a lot of effort is being driven towards that way, driving data. And there a lot of work, a lot of leapfrogging is happening in that context.
Yes.
I mean, judging for understanding Africans' pattern of life will help us tremendously in able to move goods and services across borders. But it's it's a long way. It's a long way. Gathering of data is number one. Understanding that data should be gathered is number one first. And I think, and I'm working on talking about different solutions right now about gathering of data. Most people, it's not even one of the things. It's an afterthought. Gathering of data is an afterthought. So, and we need to make it as one of the main thoughts. Look, any endeavor that I'm doing right now, either doing logistics or so, there are data out there by virtue of just, putting one and two together. There are data out there, but imagine you have a main effort, a decisive effort of gathering data. I think will be very, very powerful. And I think that would drive so much innovation and so much solutions on the continent because data will give us an insight into a lot of things that we are not seeing. Yes. I mean, I'm working on the security application right now. And, data will give you so much that you are not seeing. We only can see what we can see, but data tells a lot more, about the environment, about the landscape, about the people. about the location and all that kind of stuff like that. So it's always going to be a challenge. And I think a lot of on the continent, there's a lot of effort towards data analytics. There's a lot of questions about gathering data, cleaning data up, understanding data at different parameters and all those kind of things. But I think will serve us great if we can start from the get-go, putting center focus in our effort as we do logistic business in the continent around data.
Fantastic. So you touched upon the difficulties or challenges of acquiring data to make informed decisions, which I totally agree with. What do you think, outside of technology and data solutions, what do you think needs to be done or can be done to make Africa's supply chain infrastructure a lot more efficient, effective, and economical?
I think it's a communal effort. Some of the African countries I've been privileged to be part of worked in or traveled to. I see a lot of changes. I see a lot of people going back and things. But over the course of time, I think our communal effort as African communities have eroded over the course of time. I think we've embraced capitalism to the negative part. I mean, people are just capitalism and I was explaining to someone yesterday, our community over the course of time historically African indigenous ways looking back now as a lower rate of poverty before. Yes. You have there's a lot of communal efforts that helps you kind of help to build different coalitions and help to build solutions and people to survive. The people used to have to be really poor back in the old most African communities are very, very small because there's always something to do. Yes. But now, because we've embraced capitalism in a very strange way and embracing it to a fault, that the gap between the haves and the have-not is so deep. I mean, so deep and wide that it's not even, it takes hundreds of years to even it's going to take more than that to actually bridge the gap. So understanding, I think human development is number one. Infrastructure will come. I think when people's minds are liberated and developed, I think ability to infrastructure will definitely come. It's you don't even have to teach it. When they know better, they're going to act better. Understanding and not necessarily have to be education for the most part, but exposure into what is even obtainable. And not only that, what I mean by exposure is the fact that I'm not saying that you should jettison what is yours and embrace others, but look at what others are doing and say, how can I make my own environment better? And I think that is where our knowledge and our ability to get, because what we do around there is to be like, oh, we look at what they're doing in Dubai and all these other, we want that. Maybe no, maybe we don't want that. Maybe we want something that is different and is very unique to us that we can maintain. We have a lot of things that is not very ingrained in our cultures. Like, for example, maintenance. Yes. We don't have a maintenance culture. So maybe we want to do something. We'll do something that doesn't require much maintenance. Those kind of things that at least we know our pros and cons. We know our bad behaviors, then we can develop something around it in such a way that our bad behavior is not being kind of exposed on a day-to-day basis. And I think, developing of people in Africa, it is probably the most dire thing at the moment right now, because the people's mind are liberated. Infrastructure and every other thing will come next, because when people mind, it doesn't take much for people to start coming together and saying, let's build this, let's build that. And I think until that happens, at least from my point of view and from my foxhole, it's going to be extremely big to make African progressive. And we've always had this idea, it's really from the African continent, that we are a blessed continent, right?
Yes, yes.
All continents are blessed. I don't know who sold us that particular narrative. All continents are blessed. Is what to make out of those continents is what really makes you or break you. And of course, we might have the most natural resources of all the continents out there, but what have we done with it? There are a lot of continents out there, a lot of countries rather out there that have nothing, but they've progressed well because they've discovered that this is who they are and this is what they have, and they've made something out of nothing. But for us, we have so much, and I think even so much blessed particular resources is a course in itself, because we've not been able to do anything with it. And people, look at all the countries around the world. Some of them will have nothing, but they've been able to develop it. But yet we have abundance, and we have not been able to do. And people have come over there and kind of, ransack the whole place, and we still feel comfortable about it. So there's a lot that is going on over there. Again, I don't want to start going on a political tangent over here on there because it's beyond the scope of this podcast, but there is so much to be heard, because supply chain is a touch point for a lot of things, either socioeconomic, either geopolitical, sociological, anthropological. I mean, everything you find it there in the supply chain. And that's the beauty part of supply chain management. It touches on that aspect. Consumer behavior, I mean, name it all, data and everything is all there in supply chain. So you can't really talk about supply chain on the continent without kind of deep diving into some of those topics we talk about, because it gives you why people are doing what they're doing. How can I not move? People still, for the life of me, still don't understand why you cannot move a commodity from Cameroon to Nigeria, which are very close countries, actually they're neighboring countries, in a very seamless manner. Yes. By water. It's very complex. So you're telling me that I can't move something from Canada to Mexico or Canada to the US. It's not, nobody will believe you, because it's just impossible. But at the same time, is what is a reality on the continent. I mean, oftentimes you have to go outside the continent to get a connecting flight or connecting vessel to come back to the country of your choice. So all these things are a lot of things that we're trying to navigate, embracing the African continent and the supply chain therein.
Fantastic. You touched upon the development of Africa and the Africa identity. From a supply chain perspective, most countries, regions, economic blocks tend to have a supply chain management identity. Do you think that African countries have a specific supply chain management identity?
No.
Okay. Quite short. No.
and that's what my involvement and others in the continent were trying to define.
Yes.
There is so much that is going on the continent right now. And I think what our effort on Supply Chain Africa is to be able to, one of our secondary missions, so to say, is be able to define what African supply chain identity is.
Yes.
There's so many flavors in Africa, over 50 countries of all kinds of flavors over there. What happens in Niger is completely different from what happened in Chad, in Cameroon and whatnot. Yes, they have a lot of ethnic groups, and some of them similar ethnic groups across different countries, but they behave differently.
Yes.
And those ethnic groups, so some of the three pillars that we address in supply chain Africa is the people, the culture, and the business. The people as a centerpiece is very, very interesting, because they are the one that makes the whole thing, they add color to the whole supply chain of Africa. And you cannot have supply chain identity without understanding the cultural nuance of the people that actually drives the supply chain in Africa. Innovation and automation is going to happen in Africa, but not yet. We have a lot of people that are jobless. So, I mean, as technologies kind of leapfrog a lot of things, if we are not careful on the continent, we're going to leave people behind. And if you have technology doing a lot of things and people still jobless, it's going to be a very bad business globally. So I'm able to just carry people along, because and people are going to be center of supply chain anywhere you go in the world, regardless of technological innovation and automation or Web3 or whatever all these new progressive technological advancement that we're doing, especially in Africa, is going to be our centerpiece. So understanding the people. That's why having supply chain cultural identity, even let me expand it that way, it's quite integral. And so, for example, what happened in the Eastern Bloc of Africa has completely happened to what happened in the Western Bloc. Even in the Western Bloc, it's completely different. People in Anglophone countries are different from the way they operate is different from people in Francophone countries. Trust me, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure the nuances around each of those people that speak English and French and some that speak Portuguese and other languages. And it's a very interesting concept. And that is why the supply chain in Africa is quite unique, because you have to tie all these things together. Yes. People that speak in the southern region and the eastern region, the central region, have different ways of life. And what really makes them tick is completely different. People always say that Nigerians are very, very aggressive in the way they do things. And you see them in the way they do business. That aggressiveness is very, very, very pursuant in the way they do business. But that might not go too well from people from Kenya. That might go too well from people from Rwanda. It's just the way of the world. And how do you tie all these things together, especially when we're talking about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which has been the mantra over the last year right now, is to kind of trying to do trade within the continent. I was explaining to someone yesterday, first thing first that needs to happen is to understand the demand signal. The demand signal drives everything. The demand signal right now currently in Africa is like, go drive all resources away from Africa. That's the demand signal. But now you're trying to duplicate it by continuously, signaling for supply to the rest of the world, also supply within the continent. Because right now, Africans don't probably know, why should I need to drink coffee from Kenya? Or why should I need to drink coffee from Ethiopia? Why can't I drink coffee from Colombia? Because that was what has been, but so you are trying to understand and reshape the demand signal. And that's one thing. So there is a lot to do when it comes to African supply chain identity. It's non-existent, but it can be done. At some point, with a lot of because for that to happen, we have to have a very robust demand signal when people start trading within. And funny enough, years ago, it used to happen.
Yes.
Years ago, Africans used to trade among each other. I mean, we still have those whole trade routes in Sub-Sahara. You still have them in the lower part of Benin and all those areas. I mean, all these things are still out there and they're still very pronounced, but they kind of now they probably turn to black market, who knows? But those are hard ways, So all this issue, that's why you have a lot of all these different cultures that have moved to different countries because of all the trade that used to happen between different parts of the communities within the continent. But over the course of time, like I said, we've always embraced capitalism to the extreme. We've embraced in such a way that we've jettisoned what is very centric and very unique to us. So that idea of cultural identity is non-existent no more. So we have to create it. For Africans to trade among each other, there has to be a demand signal that makes sense. And once the demand signal makes sense, okay, let's start trading with each other. When we start trading, there'll be some commonality. Okay, this is what I see happening in the Eastern African countries. If I see what happened in the Western African countries, is there a way we can synergize our processes in such a way that we have a commonality? We have some kind of practices among supply chain in Africa that makes sense, that kind of synchronize with our culture. Because oftentimes you see that African cultures are always intermingling everything they do. Yes. Everything we do. Every religion we do, we have our own African flavor in it.
Yes.
And our education has African flavor in it. And our supply chain too is not going to be anything different. So we have to also understand that, because it's always part of who we are, but we've never really taken care of it. Like, for example, if you go to an Anglican church in the UK and go to an Anglican church, and I know they've been trying to do a lot of make it all central, but trust me, it is not the same. Anglican church the Catholic church is the same because they have African influence in it. When it talks of African supply chain identity, I don't think it's too far-fetched that our culture is very centric to it. So as we continue to revive this and be able to make people comfortable about understanding our culture and our cultural nuances and making sure that this is who we are, and let people that want to trade with us understand these cultural nuances. When we go to all these other countries as well, we abide by their own cultural nuances that is within their supply chain. But oftentimes we kind of disdain ours when it comes to us. So there's a lot that is going on that needs to be reshaped, a lot of unlearning, relearning, and learning that happen across the way. But African supply chain identity is a must. Is it possible? Yes. Are we there yet? Absolutely not.
Okay. That's a very comprehensive answer. Fantastic. So, you've touched upon the nuances of Africa's supply chain identity, whether it exists or whether it doesn't exist. If there was somebody who wanted to learn more about this African supply chain identity, are there any pieces of literature, research, where would someone go to read up on this and find out more information if they wanted to do so?
So we've been working for the past few months on a concept called Supply Chain Africa. It's part of my organization, Adebayo, Adeleke, LLC.
Oh, fantastic.
And also partnering with us, SAG Logistics, who's going to be our kind of running the point on this. That is a marketing, supply chain marketing firm that is going to be helping to kind of spearhead this. Supply Chain Africa is about bringing everything we've talked about today to fore, about understanding the intricate part of supply chain in Africa. And so by the time this podcast is airing, by the first quarter of next year, our first magazine will be out.
Fantastic.
First magazine will be out. But prior to that, we're going to be hosting, supplychainafrica.org. It's going to be where all our content is going to be. So as we continue to work with different agencies, our stakeholders coming to the continent, because what we're trying to do, in essence, with Supply Chain Africa is to first of all, people among Africans to understand what the power within their supply chain is.
Yes.
And also to be able to understand African supply chain identity is one of our secondary tasks. And also to let across all these 50 plus countries be able to understand what they are doing. People in Lesotho doesn't understand what people in Rwanda are doing. Oftentimes we all work in silos. So exposing what is going on across the continent as far as supply chain is concerned, so that we can, once everybody sees what is going on, you might be having some problems, some challenges within your business that is not, you don't know how to get about it. This publication maybe would highlight some of those things, and you're like, wow, the same problem I'm having here, somebody just found a solution to it in South Africa. I want to encourage collaboration between those African countries and African supply chain. And more importantly, for others, I want to do business on the continent. There's a lot of things that people don't know. There's a lot of misinformation out there about what Africa is and what is not. And our job is to kind of shine lights on what pretty much is it as well. And we are kind of bipartisan in nature. We're not supporting anything. It's a very clear, we kind of report as we see it, we share the stories as we see it. It's very unbiased, at least to a large extent.
Very objective.
Very objective in nature, absolutely. So it's going to be coming up in the first quarter of next year. So there's been a lot of work, research, and covering the whole continent is different. And also there's still a lot of people that still refer to Africa as a country. So it's a very interesting. There's a lot of learning and unlearning that we need to do. But I believe from supply chain standpoint, we can do much of that if we kind of expose the beauty of what supply chain in Africa is.
Yeah. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but one thing I've kind of observed is that most successful companies in Africa tend to fully embed themselves into their value chain and supply chain. Do you think there's a way around this, or is this part of Africa's supply chain identity?
I think it is, but I think most successful companies in Africa understand the nuances of it. For those that have survived the stuff, they understand the nuances across the African supply chain, that we call it supply chain identity. They understand the impact of culture, they understand the impact of people, and how colorful those things can, how twisted it can be as well.
Yes.
Having this at the back of your mind makes you to navigate. You have backup to a backup to a backup. People don't understand why that happens. But the guy that's supposed to be driving your truck might fell sick today, or something might happen to it. What's going to happen?
Yeah. You've mentioned how the risks and challenges of supply chain, how people are working in silos. So if you look at current matters in terms of, at the moment we have a global pandemic which is taking place, and it's shown us how vulnerable our global supply chains are. How do you feel that most African countries or markets have reacted to this pandemic?
I think the swift change that we're seeing in other parts of the world is not seen in Africa. It's a very interesting question you ask, because a lot of people in Africa still don't believe COVID happened because some of them didn't get affected. And that could be because when it happened in other part of the world, a lot of people start shutting at that point. So a lot of travel restricted, but it depends on the kind of where you align your belief system. It's either you don't believe it happens, or you believe that some people have actually, due to travel restriction, it has kind of prevented it from spreading wide. Some also believe that because of African way of life and a lot of stuff going on over there, because Africa is always exposed to all kind of, they have public health stuff that the African kind of build some kind of immunity against it. So the adverse effect of what we see across in Asia, in Americas, in Europe is not that pronounced in Africa. And I know Africans still experience a lot of debt in COVID and all, but the way people are, the way people are kind of, the way they kind of associate. There's still a lot of masking and everything. There's a lot of shutdown, but it's very difficult, especially in some of those pockets and some of those areas, because they can't experience those shutdown for long. People don't have a way to eat. If they can't go, they can. People don't have those reserves. They don't have government, subsidizing to some of these things. So it's going to be extremely hard. So Africans have to figure out a way and get back to business as soon as possible, because you eat what you kill in most African countries. Yeah. So if you're not out there doing it, it's going to be so. I don't think, and what I've seen, I think business as normal is continuing in Africa. Hasn't really, really embraced it like the rest of the world, because they don't have. I just have the leisure. They can't afford the leisure. The commodities have to leave the continent. for people to eat. So, and then not being received over there as an hampered. I think the global trade index has really affected Africa as well, because not too many people are requesting for commodities out of the continent, especially for international trade. In some countries, they don't even know that COVID existed. In some, they keep carrying on. They thought it was just a phase. So, from my experience and what I've seen so far, people in the major cities have, that kind of had those kind of exposure to it, took it serious, and people in the villages and the interior parts don't think anything like that is actually happening. So it depends on who you ask and where you ask them or which country you ask them from. They're going to tell you if COVID actually existed or not. But for international trade, it has really affected a lot of import and exports for the most part, especially for people that live and die by it. But internally, it hasn't really affected much of African ways. So.
Yeah. So do you feel that the pandemic has made Africa more or less attractive as a trading and investment option?
Absolutely. I think it's opened a new doors, because there's a lot of nearshoring has happened. There's been a lot of conversation about nearshoring, but we've all been drunk about manufacturing coming out of Asia. And because of Asia and how they pivot towards this whole thing, I am an advocate, like many others. I'm an advocate of kind of splitting manufacturing globally. You shouldn't have one kind of concentrate in one part of the world, which is Asia. We should have some in the Atlantic, which is Africa, so that when this part of the world is being plagued, we can shift production to the other part of the world. So I believe COVID has actually shown a lot of possibilities for Africa, but is Africa ready? Does Africa have the resources to kind of be in that particular base for the rest of the world? Our infrastructure is ready to be able to accept that. Do we even have enough to actually give ourselves in Africa, talk less of giving to the rest of the world? So these are the questions most African leaders that are very progressive should be answering to themselves. Am I positioning myself or my country in such a way that we are good enough for ourselves? We're also good enough to make our country a place whereby we can do business with the rest of the world. I don't think most African leaders can bold-chestedly say that now. But this particular pandemic has opened several doors to a lot of African nations to do great with their things.
Yeah, so you mentioned or raised the question whether Africa has the capacity and capability to kind of scale up to serve the global economy, which then brings the question with regards to intra-Africa trade. Do you feel that the pandemic has increased that discussion around intra-Africa trade? Because at the moment, as a trading bloc, we don't trade a lot with each other. I think intra-Africa trade accounts for something like 16 to 17% of Africa's trade. So do you think that the pandemic has increased the discussion around intra-Africa trade?
Absolutely. I think it shows that, look, if the help is not coming from afar, we need to start looking inwards. And if the rest of the world is not requesting or demanding, is the demand signal over there is being handicapped by COVID, then we need to look inwards within ourselves. Africa is over 1.2 billion in population. That's huge. And I think there's a lot that can be done within the continent. There's a lot that can be done. And of course, the way the whole continent is and the way it's been shaped is to drive resources out of the land, not to trade within themselves. So there has to be a lot of realignment of Africa doing business with itself and also doing the rest of the world. And that could be very, very challenging. It might happen in our lifetime, it might not. Years of entrenching this particular system of driving. Look at it. Belt and Silk Road initiative by the Chinese, all these big roads and bridges they're building is to drive resources out of the land. I was using Nigeria as a prime example. Everything ended up in Apapa, Lagos, which is the shipping dock. So that's why supply chain is quite integral to what is going to be happening in the nearest future. If this thing will actually take a foothold, how do we connect the road network between Kenya and some of the neighboring countries? How do we align the custom, the duties? How do we encourage exportation in our policies? How do we empower all these trading blocs, ECOWAS, the East African countries community, the African Union, because most of these things requires a very strong body to do it. But again, the countries that are funding those institutions outside the shores of Africa, it's going to be extremely difficult to actually take a foothold. So it is very important for Africa to kind of take the challenge.
Yes.
When I heard about the percentage of what funds AU, is actually not from AU communities, it's from other outside the country. So whoever pays the piper, right, dictates the tune, right? It's just the way it goes. So there's so much to be unboxed in this whole debacle of, but I love it because I think it kind of make us face the music. Like, look, for these things to happen, there are certain things that we have to tell ourselves some truth. We have to be frank with how we address certain issues. Who is paying us? How are we funding all these initiatives that we have over there? As long as we continue to have external resource to fund these things, we are not able to make decisions on ourselves. And if we are not careful, this continental free trade agreement will be torpedoed by outside interests. Just like a sniper, you just pick the bigger countries out.
Yeah.
Africa has to take their stand. You need leaders that will be able to take their stand, like, we have to do this. We have to do this not for us, but for our generation. I always tell people, it's like we are playing a script. This script that we are currently in has been laid down about 30 years ago. So whatever we do today is about writing the script for 40 years from now. And unfortunately, it's kind of preceded by somebody else's script that was written for us. So you can only imagine that's why some of these things are just been prolonged over the course of time. So that's why it is important that our actions today is quite imperative for the prosperity of African nations.
Yeah. So if we stick to the theme of intra-Africa trade, what role do you think that supply chain management can play in the success of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement?
I think it's, like I always explain to someone, it's a bedrock of the feed. And in all my meetings I've had on this, nobody has really talked about supply chain, which is very scary.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They made mention of it a few times, but I think that, nobody goes to school to study trade, and except of new generation schools. But trade just happened. It has been happening from the onset of time. When man was created, man has been trading. And and beneath the trade is supply chain. What makes the trade happen is supply chain. And we can talk about trading one African country and the other. But if our trade networks, if our rate, I call it the tracks that make the trade happens, is not well aligned, it's going to fail. So I believe the free trade agreement will be as good as if African supply chains are aligned. And for you to align, the countries have to be aligned in a way. Our road networks. Today, I can boldly say, I live in the state of Texas. I can boldly say, you can actually check it online. Texas has over 600,000 roads. If I cannot ascertain how many miles of road over there, how in the world do I even know which road leads to what? Yes. Do you understand what I'm saying? There's a lot of things that is unknown. So for African trade to really take a foothold, the supply chain has to be on flick.
Yes.
And the way it has to be on flick, we have to talk about supply chain identity. You see how that can kind of cascade to each other. Yes. If we don't have supply chain identity, then how do we align regional supply chains? And regional supply chain is well entrenched in regional culture and everything. And Africans, we fight against each other. Oh, this is from this is how you do it in your country. All those things have to be figured out. But we have time. It can be done. But there has to be people have to be willing and able to do that. So unless African supply chain is aligned and well-defined, trade is going to be impossible. And if you look at olden days, how some of those things happen when they have because all those things were allowed. You can move from one country to the other with ease. Nobody is giving you problems. Those cultural communities understand each other. Once you move for this side, it's a different culture. So it's kind of ingrained in you.
Yes.
But over the course of time, when we started doing demarcation, this is one country, this is the other country, and we started running into problems. Communities started raising their ugly head from here and there, and we started fighting each other, across borders. And all those things kind of disappear. But it can be done again. If really this trade needs to happen, understanding our nuances that is there in our culture, and, amplify what needs to be amplified, and kind of, with a communal effort, kind of remove what needs to be removed. And let's make a seamless effort across board. I should buy something in Kenya. I'd be like, okay, this truck should leave Kenya today, should arrive in Abidjan on this day with no issues. We're not there yet, far from it.
Yeah, I think the future is very promising, but as you said earlier on, what we do today usually plays out 10, 20, 30 years in the future because I guess the
Yeah,
story has already been mapped out
yeah,
and written, so our actions will probably result in some kind of result within 10, 20, 30 years' time. I mean, I know this is an extremely broad question, but from your own point of view, your own perspective, where do you think the supply chain management discipline will be positioned in Africa in 5 years' time?
I think it's going to be one of the topmost industry. I'm seeing a lot of growth across Africa right now. A lot of people embracing the vocation of supply chain. I'm seeing a lot of young adults embracing, being proud to call, with wearing the badge, calling themselves I'm a supply chain professional. I've seen a lot of education and certifications going on over there, and I see a lot of people doing greater things. So in the next 5 years, all things being equal now, emphasis on the word, all things being equal, I see the growth of supply chain in the continent huge. As free trade agreement continue to take a foothold, I begin to see more people embracing the concept of supply chain management as a core concept now. What I also see happening is African redefining their own supply chain nuances. I begin to see people start jettisoning the Western and the Eastern philosophy in their supply chain and start embracing what is African supply chain. I see it happening.
Yes.
To what extent, I don't know, but I see in the next 5 years is going to be fully entrenched. People start understanding this is how we do things here, this is how we do things there as for supply chain is concerned. So it's quite promising. And I think what we've started here and in different corridors as we start with Supply Chain Africa is to make sure that we tell our story.
Fantastic. I mean, more importantly, what will you be doing? What projects, what exciting ventures will you be involved in Africa in 5 years' time?
I'm well involved in African supply chain, and in a global context, I'm also very entrenched in supply chain risk management. Actually, that's my core competency. It's just that the fact that I cannot turn a blind eye to what is going on in Africa for the most part.
Yeah.
So I'm in the next 5 to 10 years, I see myself probably, helping to impact to shape the narrative of what African supply chain is, and more importantly, what global risk management is, this narrative around it, and how we kind of manage and talk about risk globally. So that's and of course, continue to do bridge, and hopefully by then I'll be like retire. I'm retired. I've retired my first Adebayo Adeleke 1.0. I was already retired. By then, 2.0 will have retired as well. But when you do something that you enjoy, you really don't retire from it. You just continue to do it, continue to advance the industry in both globally and Africa-wide. So I think I have two mandates to continue to advance new progressive method of identifying risk and managing risk globally, and also have the mandate to help define African supply chain. So those are the things I see myself getting involved in the next 10 years. I mean, by then there'll be new blood in the block, and I'll have been probably relegated to a mentor or something of that nature. So.
That's not a relegation, that's a promotion.
Something that like you gotta let the young run it. So, yes, but I always consider myself young at heart.
Yes. Forever young, forever young.
Forever young, yes.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, or even African proverbs or affirmations that keep us going when times are hard. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
There's so many. There's so many to it. I mean, there's always, every situation births a new saying, but for me, it is, it's not even from African proverbs. It is from George Patton. Yes. It's audacity, audacity, audacity. Everywhere I go, it's just being audacious in everything you do. And I think you're going to see the result if you really don't care. And, as I was driving yesterday, I realized that most people that are successful don't really care about what other people think. Yes. And in the long road of journey to success or where you want to be, oftentimes it's a lonely road. Nobody will going to understand you. Nobody will going to understand what you're doing. And I think once you get to that space, you're in the right company. You're probably a lonely road by yourself. But when action starts happening, people will get to understand you. So for me, it's audacity, audacity, audacity. It's fantastic. It is just three words that kind of drive for you to get to where you want to be from being ordinary to extraordinary. You have to be audacious. You have to be audacious, and you have to just don't turn a blind eye and just do what you have to do.
Yes, yeah. I've never heard that one before. Audacity, audacity, audacity. I think that's one I'll definitely remember and use myself. So as we're coming to the close of our conversation, I was wondering if you have any closing remarks, final call to action for people who are doing business in Africa or interested in doing business in Africa.
Yes, so the fly call this declaring call. It's I grew up on the continent, just like many of us. I've been blessed in all my endeavors, but it's also good to go back and see, okay, what can I give back to the continent? And for me, it is helping championing a new kind of era of supply chain and making the world a better place and making people have supply chain, value chain, making people have equity in what they're producing and whatnot, and redefining what we have. And I think the continent will be a better place. I can't tackle all the challenges on the continent. No, can't. But the one I have that I believe I can shed light on is on the issue of supply chain. And that'll be my give back to the continent that has given me a lot. I was born and raised in the continent. So my ability to be able to traverse the world have been great in my first career in the US military. My value system contributed to growing up in the African ecosystem. So no one can ever take that one away from me. And regardless of what I think of the continent right now, what I would think of it in the nearest future, they gave me life and the value system I had to hold dearly to myself. And that has served me well, not only when I was in Africa, but also after I left the shores of Africa. So I encourage everyone that has taken a breath out of Africa or drink African water at some point in their lifetime to find a way to help the continent, not by handing them anything, but by making it a better place from their standpoint. Everyone needs one, and I think the continent can be better off. It's not where it needs to be, where it used to be either. So we have that kind of fiduciary responsibility to make it a better place, at least for me. Regardless, I've embraced America since I raised up my right hand. I always in America, but also I have a responsibility that is burning internal to help in any shape or form to better Africans and Africans' ways of life. So that is why I'm on this journey. I'm on this challenge. And I'm asking everyone else that is out there, regardless you're new, embrace culture and nationality to at some point you look back, because you can't take it away. You cannot, no one can take that away from you or where you were born, regardless of how much you want to adapt to the world. I've adapted. I'll give my life for America. I've done it before, and I'll do it again. But that does not take away. And people always find it very strange. Like, how can you be American and still, hold affinity? It's like, you can't, because you're never in my shoe. You were born and raised in Point Blank, but I have a different view. You were born in a different country, and you still have people there, and you're still very near the place near and dear to your heart. But you have embraced you've laid out your life for that country. Until you've walked that path, you can't really tell much. But I think we owe it to a lot of things to be able to better Africa. So in any shape or form that we endeavor, we whatever endeavor we are, we kind of we picked, I think will make a huge sense. We show it to ourselves to make the continent a better place.
Fantastic.
Esther, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed. I always enjoy our conversations.
Yes, we do have very in-depth, detailed conversations. Exactly. I think a lot of our conversations are outside the scope of this podcast, but they're always engaging and educating.
Exactly. So I really thank you for inviting me to your podcast and to share my viewpoints on what I'm doing in globally and also on the continent of Africa, supply chain Africa is concerned. So I'm really looking forward to it. And when our first edition is out, I'll send it to you, and we'll. Awesome.
I look forward to it. Thank you, Adebayo.
Thank you.
I think that's been an amazing conversation, interview, whatever you want to call it. I think the closing remarks, call to action, is a fantastic way to close episode 2 of the Unlocking Africa podcast. Thank you for your valuable time and sharing some of your cutting edge insight and knowledge. So thank you, Adebayo. If people want to connect with you and learn more about what you're up to, how can they do so?
I'm always on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my kind of connect to the world. Adebayo, Adeleke, and connect with me. We share ideas. I talk. I always engage with people on there on LinkedIn. And also on Twitter as well, Adebayo Adeleke. The Twitter thing is still a very strange thing, but I'm getting used to it. And I'm on Adebayo1 on Instagram for Instagram folks. I really get silly on that. I don't have TikTok account yet, so. But I'm also on Facebook as well as Adebayo Adeleke. So absolutely.
Fantastic.
So looking forward to connecting to everyone.
Okay. I think what I'll do is I'll leave your contact details in the podcast show notes so people can get in contact with you quite easily. So thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure and we'll speak soon. Thank you, Adebayo.
Thank you much.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review on Apple Podcast. Thank you and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.